The first time Roan saw Lyra, he mistook her for a hallucination. He had been working 16 hours straight on the outer hull repairs of Nexus Station, the vast interstellar outpost situated at the crossroads of 3 major trade routes. Sleep deprivation and oxygen recycler anomalies could do strange things to a human mind, especially one as deliberately closed off as his. Yet there she was, floating outside his viewport, a humanoid figure wrapped in what appeared to be living vines that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Her skin held a subtle lavender tint that caught the starlight, and where a human would have hair, she had what looked like delicate fronds that moved with graceful undulation even in the vacuum of space. Roan blinked, certain the apparition would vanish. It didn't. Station Engineer 6A, came the voice through his comm system. Request immediate assistance at Botanical Sector 12. The voice was melodic, but clear, with an accent that suggested the speaker was translating through an internal device rather than speaking his language natively. Who authorized your EVA? Roan asked, instinctively falling back on protocol. No one should be outside the station without clearance, especially not in the unshielded section where he was performing critical repairs. I am Lyra of the Florians. I have temporary resident status. Clearance code Gamma 973. There was a pause, and then, the garden is dying. The way she said it, with such bare emotion, caused something to stir within Roan. Something he thought he'd successfully buried years ago, alongside memories of Earth's last gardens. Return to your airlock. This section is undergoing critical maintenance, he responded flatly. Please, the alien woman said, her fronds curling inward in what he would later learn was a gesture of deep distress. The support systems are failing. My garden, it is the last piece of my home world. Roan's hands paused over the panel he was repairing. He knew he should follow protocol, direct her to file a proper maintenance request, and continue with his assigned tasks. But something in her plea resonated with a part of himself he'd long since abandoned. Return to airlock 12B. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes, he said, immediately questioning his own decision. The Florian nodded, her fronds relaxing slightly, and propelled herself back toward the station with graceful undulations of her body. As Roan finished the panel repair with practiced efficiency, he found himself wondering about the alien woman and her garden. The Nexus Station housed over 40 different species from across 3 galaxies. But Florians were rare. He vaguely recalled reading about their planet's destruction decades ago, a once lush world consumed by its dying sun. 23 minutes later, Roan entered Botanical Sector 12, a specialized dome that had been added to the station 5 years ago to accommodate non-standard life forms. He'd never had reason to visit before. The moment the airlock cycled open, his senses were assaulted by a rich tapestry of scents, earthy, sweet, sharp, and soothing all at once. The humidity was higher here. The lighting adjusted to mimic the spectrum of a star he'd never seen. And at the center of it all stood Lyra, her hands buried in soil up to her wrists, her fronds fully extended and glowing with a soft blue light. Around her, what should have been a thriving ecosystem of alien flora now drooped and faded. Dead leaves and withered vines littered the floor. Environmental control panels along the walls blinked with warning lights. The atmospheric regulators are malfunctioning, Lyra said without looking up. The backup systems engaged 2 days ago, but they're calibrated for human-compatible environments. Roan approached one of the panels, immediately noting the cascade of system failures. This entire sector should have been evacuated and quarantined. I cannot leave, Lyra said simply. He turned to face her, prepared to cite station regulations, but the words died in his throat. Tears, or something like them, were trailing down her lavender cheeks, leaving faintly luminescent tracks. "These plants," she continued, "they're not just decorative. They're connections to those who were lost." Roan felt something crack within the ice he'd carefully cultivated around his heart. He understood loss. He understood connections that couldn't be severed, even when they should be. "Let me see what I can do," he said, moving toward the main control console. Hours passed as Roan worked, diagnosing the complex interplay of system failures. The botanical sector used a specialized environmental control system that balanced hundreds of variables to maintain the delicate ecosystem. A recent power surge had corrupted the calibration data, and the backup systems had defaulted to standard human-compatible settings. As he worked, Lyra moved quietly around the garden, tending to the struggling plants, singing to them in a language his translator couldn't process. The melody was haunting, filled with emotions he recognized, but couldn't name. "You're losing moisture through the eastern dome's seal," he finally said, breaking the silence between them. "And the carbon dioxide levels are fluctuating wildly because the intake valves are misaligned." Lyra looked up at him, her iridescent eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. "Can it be fixed?" The correct answer was yes, but with significant resource allocation that would require multiple approvals from station management. The garden was classified as non-essential, despite its importance to the station's small Florian population. "Yes," Roan heard himself say. "I'll need to come back with specialized equipment." Relief washed over Lyra's features. "Thank you," she said, the words simple but weighted with genuine gratitude. As Roan prepared to leave, his gaze lingered on a particularly striking plant in the corner, a spiral structure that seemed to be made of crystalline material rather than organic matter. Despite the environmental issues, it alone seemed to be thriving. "What is that one?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Lyra followed his gaze, and her fronds rippled with what might have been pleasure. "That is a memory crystal. It contains the collective experiences of my family line. In your terms, perhaps you would call it a genealogical archive." Roan nodded, though he didn't truly understand. His own family history was a closed book, pages torn out and scattered across the stars during Earth's final diaspora. "I'll return tomorrow," he said, and left before she could thank him again. That night, lying in his sparse quarters, Roan stared at the ceiling and wondered why he'd agreed to help the Florian woman. The garden wasn't his responsibility. His job was to maintain critical station systems, not waste resources on a non-essential botanical experiment. And yet, the image of Lyra standing among her dying plants, refusing to abandon them, had lodged itself in his mind. There was something in her devotion that reminded him of his mother, tending to their small window garden in the last Earth-based apartment they'd lived in before everything changed. The next day, Roan arrived at Botanical Sector 12 with a toolkit and parts he'd requisitioned under the guise of critical environmental maintenance. Technically, it wasn't a lie. The systems were indeed failing. He just omitted the part about them being non-critical to station operations. Lyra was waiting for him, her fronds moving with subdued energy. The garden looked worse than the day before, with more plants showing signs of stress and decay. "I brought moisture sealant for the dome," Roan said, setting down his equipment. "And we'll need to recalibrate the entire environmental system, not just patch the existing settings." Lyra nodded, watching him with those unsettling iridescent eyes. "I have been told that humans do not care for things that do not benefit them directly," she said after a moment. Roan paused in unpacking his tools. "Who told you that?" "Many. The station administrator suggested I should accept the loss of the garden and adapt to standard habitation units like other, non-human residents." Roan felt a flicker of anger, quickly suppressed. Humans are diverse. Some care too much, others, not enough. And you? Lyra asked, her head tilting slightly. I do my job, he replied, turning back to his tools. They worked in companionable silence for several hours. Roan repaired the dome seal and began the laborious process of recalibrating the environmental controls. Lyra tended to her plants, using what appeared to be her own bodily fluids to nourish the most critically affected specimens. Your species can photosynthesize, Roan observed, as he watched her press her glowing palm against a withering vine that immediately straightened and brightened. Yes, though we require more than light. We exchange energies with our surroundings. We give and take. Like a symbiotic relationship? Lyra's fronds rippled in what he was beginning to recognize as her equivalent of a smile. Similar. Yes, but more. Intentional. We choose to share our energy. Roan considered this as he worked. Humans had always been takers. Of resources, of land, of life, even now, scattered across the galaxy. They brought with them the same hunger that had eventually consumed their home world. He had learned early to take only what he needed, to exist without excess. It was a cold way to live, but efficient. Days turned into weeks as Roan continued to assist Lyra with the garden. Each visit revealed new layers of complexity in both the environmental systems and in Lyra herself. She was not simply a botanist or caretaker. She was connected to the garden in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. When parts of it thrived, she seemed to glow brighter. When sections withered despite their efforts, her fronds would dim and curl inward. "Why is this garden so important to you?" Roan finally asked one day as they sat together, watching the newly recalibrated atmospheric system stabilize. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. When Flore was destroyed, our people scattered. Some, like my ancestors, took with them seedlings and spores, living pieces of our world. Her gaze swept across the garden. This is not merely plants and soil. Each species here represents a family line, a community, a piece of our collective soul. She reached out and touched a delicate blue flower that had recently bloomed. This one holds the essence of my birth cluster. As long as it lives, something of them remains in the universe. Roan thought of Earth, now a barren rock orbiting a sun that had long since ceased to nurture life. Unlike Lyra's people, humans had escaped with technology, with knowledge, with artifacts, but little of the living essence of their world. "I understand," he said softly, surprising himself with the realization that he truly did. As the garden began to recover under their combined efforts, Roan found himself spending more time in Botanical Sector 12 than his quarters. The lush environment, so different from the sterile corridors of the rest of the station, soothed something in him he hadn't known needed soothing. Lyra noticed his increased presence. "You find peace here," she observed one evening as he sat, cross-legged on the soft ground, running diagnostics on the secondary irrigation system. "It's quieter than the engineering deck," he replied, not looking up from his work. "Not physically quieter," Lyra said, "but quieter here." She touched her chest, over where a human heart would be. Roan's hand stilled on his diagnostic tool. No one on the station spoke to him this way, with gentle perception that cut through his carefully constructed barriers. His colleagues respected his efficiency and his solitude. They didn't question why he volunteered for holidays, why he never joined them for recreation, why his personnel file listed no emergency contacts. "I grew up with plants," he admitted, the words emerging before he could stop them. "My mother was a botanical engineer, before the collapse." Lyra settled beside him, her movements fluid and graceful. The collapse of Earth's ecosystems? Roan nodded. She was working on adaptive agriculture, plants that could survive the changing conditions. She believed until the end that she could find a solution. His throat tightened with memories he usually kept locked away. She died, still believing it. And you stopped believing, Lyra said, not a question but an observation. I stopped believing in a lot of things. Lyra's fronds gently undulated, casting soft blue light over his hands. Yet here you are, helping to save a garden that is not yours, that offers you no practical benefit. Roan didn't have an answer for that. Their conversation was interrupted by a station-wide announcement. Attention, all personnel. Gravitational anomaly detected in Sector 9. Prepare for possible emergency protocols. Roan immediately stood, his engineering instincts taking over. That's close to this sector. I need to check the stabilization systems. Lyra rose with him, her expression concerned. What does this mean? Probably nothing. Space stations detect anomalies all the time. Most pass without impact. But even as he said it, Roan felt uneasy. Nexus Station was positioned specifically to avoid gravitational disturbances from nearby stellar bodies. He moved to the sector's monitoring station and pulled up the station-wide alert system. The readings made his blood run cold. It's not a standard anomaly, he said, fingers flying over the controls. It's a micro-black hole, passing through this quadrant. Lyra moved closer, looking at the display. Is the station in danger? Not directly. The station's shields can withstand the gravitational stresses if it passes at the projected distance. Rowan pulled up more detailed scans. But the shield configuration will prioritize life support and critical operations. Non-essential sections. He trailed off, looking around at the garden. Understanding dawned in Lyra's iridescent eyes. The garden will be unprotected. The environmental systems won't be able to compensate for the gravitational distortion. Everything here will be crushed. Roan's mind raced through options, calculations, possibilities. Unless we can reinforce the local shielding. How would we do that? Roan was already moving toward the exit. I need to get equipment from engineering. Stay here. Monitor the systems. If the readings in any section drop below 70%, transfer power from the irrigation to the atmospheric regulators. Before Lyra could respond, he was gone. Running through the corridors toward the engineering deck, his mind was clear. Focused on the problem at hand, he knew what he needed. Portable shield generators designed for hull breaches, power cells from the emergency reserves, and a distribution node to link them into the sector's existing systems. What he was planning would violate at least 6 station protocols. Diverting emergency equipment for a non-essential section during a station-wide alert was grounds for immediate dismissal, possibly worse, depending on the outcome. He didn't hesitate. The engineering deck was in controlled chaos when he arrived, with teams being dispatched to critical systems throughout the station. No one questioned Roan as he gathered what he needed, his senior status and reputation for competence serving as sufficient authorization. As he was loading the last of the shield generators onto a transport cart, a hand fell on his shoulder. He turned to find Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, the station's chief science officer, regarding him with a questioning look. Those are meant for the residential sectors. Engineer, she said, her gaze flickering to the equipment he'd assembled. Roan straightened. I'm reinforcing Botanical Sector 12. Dr. Morgan's eyebrows rose. That's not on the critical systems list. You know protocol. The garden houses irreplaceable biological specimens, Roan interrupted. The last of their kind. So do several other research sectors, all of which are receiving standard protection, according to protocol. Her voice was firm, but not unkind. What makes this garden different? Rowan? He could have lied. cited some obscure research value, or claimed he was following specialized orders. Instead, he found himself saying, "Someone I care about will lose everything if it's destroyed." Dr. Morgan studied him for a long moment, surprise evident in her expression. Everyone on the station knew Roan didn't care about anyone or anything beyond his duties. "The Florian," she finally said. "I heard you've been helping her." Roan nodded once, already calculating how much time he'd lost in this conversation, how much remained before the black hole's closest approach. To his surprise, Dr. Morgan stepped back. "Take the auxiliary power couplings too. You'll need them to maintain stability during the peak distortion." Roan stared at her, uncomprehending. "Go," she said with a slight smile. "Consider this my contribution to interspecies diplomacy." He didn't waste time questioning his good fortune. Within minutes, he was racing back to Botanical Sector 12, the transport cart loaded with everything he needed. Lyra met him at the entrance, her fronds agitated. "The gravitational readings are increasing faster than predicted. The outer plants are already showing stress responses." Together, they worked with urgent precision, installing the shield generators at key structural points throughout the dome. Rowan configured them to create an overlapping field that would counteract the gravitational distortion, while Lyra used her connection to the plants to direct their energy inward, away from the dome's perimeter. As they worked, the station around them groaned and creaked, the sound of massive structures under stress. Emergency lighting flickered on as the main power grid redistributed energy to critical systems. "We need more power," Roan muttered as the shield generators came online, but showed only 60% capacity, not enough to fully protect the garden. Lyra placed her hand on one of the generators, and to Roan's astonishment, her skin began to glow brighter, pulsing with energy that flowed visibly into the machine. The power readings jumped to 75%. "What are you doing?" he asked, alarmed. "Sharing my energy," she replied, her voice strained. "As I told you, we give and take." "Stop," Roan commanded, pulling her hand away. "You'll drain yourself." Lyra's eyes met his, determination clear in their depths. "This garden is worth my energy. It is worth everything." Roan felt something shift inside him, a tectonic movement of emotion he'd long suppressed. "Then we share the burden," he said, and quickly reconfigured the power distribution to draw from his own suit's emergency reserves. The shield strengthened to 85% capacity, still not ideal, but better. Around them, the plants closest to the dome began to bend and twist as the gravitational forces intensified. "It's not enough," Lyra whispered, watching as a cluster of crystalline growths shattered under the invisible pressure. Roan made a decision then that would change everything. "There's one more power source," he said, moving to the central control panel. The station's main grid. Lyra's eyes widened. "But you said—" "I know what I said." His fingers flew over the controls, bypassing security protocols he himself had helped design. "This will trigger alarms in central operations. They'll try to override it." "They will punish you," Lyra said, understanding the implications. Roan met her gaze steadily. "Some things are worth it." With a final command sequence, he connected their makeshift shield system directly to the station's main power grid, diverting energy that should have been going to secondary life support systems. The shield generators hummed with renewed power, reaching 98% capacity. Throughout the garden, plants that had been bending under invisible pressure straightened. The creaking of the dome structure subsided. And as predicted, the communications panel immediately lit up with an incoming transmission from Central Operations. "Engineer 6A, you are in violation of Emergency Protocol 17. Cease all unauthorized power diversion immediately," came the stern voice of the station commander. Roan took a deep breath. Unable to comply, Central. Protecting essential biological specimens. Your actions are jeopardizing station stability. This is a direct order. With respect, Commander, I'm doing what needs to be done. Roan cut the communication and locked down the control panel. Lyra moved to stand beside him, her fronds brushing against his arm in a gesture he now recognized as affection and concern. What happens now? Now we wait, he replied. The black hole will reach its closest point in approximately 22 minutes. If our shields hold, the garden survives. And if they don't? Roan looked around at the living tapestry they'd worked so hard to save, at the memory crystal that contained Lyra's family history, at the delicate blue flower that was all that remained of her birth cluster. Then we'll start again, he said with a certainty that surprised him. Somewhere else. The minutes that followed were among the most tense Roan had ever experienced. The gravitational distortion increased steadily, testing the limits of their improvised shielding. Throughout the garden, plants swayed and trembled despite the protection, responding to forces that transcended physical barriers. Lyra moved among them, touching, singing, sharing her energy in ways Roan couldn't fully comprehend, but deeply respected. Her determination to preserve this living connection to her past resonated with something long dormant within him, a belief that some things were worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for. As the black hole reached its closest approach, the entire station seemed to hold its breath. The shield generators strained at maximum capacity, their casings hot to the touch. Power fluctuations rippled through the systems as the station's automatic protocols attempted to reclaim the diverted energy. In the center of the garden, the memory crystal began to glow with an intense light, responding to the extreme gravitational conditions. Lyra gasped, her attention immediately drawn to it. "What's happening?" Roan asked, moving to her side. "The crystal is absorbing the gravitational energy," she explained, wonder in her voice. "It's growing." Indeed, before their eyes, the crystalline structure was expanding, branching out in fractal patterns that captured and refracted light in mesmerizing ways. As it grew, the surrounding plants seemed to strengthen, their colors deepening, their structures stabilizing. "It's protecting them," Lyra whispered. "It's using the very force that threatened to destroy us." Roan watched in amazement as the memory crystal continued to expand, its growth accelerating until it formed a canopy above a significant portion of the garden. The gravitational readings on his monitors began to stabilize, then gradually decrease as the black hole continued its passage beyond the station. Slowly, the immediate danger passed. The shield generators powered down automatically as the strain lessened. The station's systems began to return to normal operations. Roan ran a complete diagnostic on the garden's environmental controls. "Everything is stabilizing," he reported. "No permanent damage to the core systems." Lyra was still gazing at the transformed memory crystal. "It didn't just survive," she said softly. "It evolved, adapted." She turned to Roan, her eyes luminous with emotion. "Just as we must." Before Roan could respond, the sector's door slid open to admit a security team led by the station commander himself, a stern man named Garrett, who was known for his rigid adherence to protocol. "Engineer Roan," the commander said, his voice cold. "You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Report to security for processing." Roan straightened, facing his superior with calm certainty. "I made the necessary decision to preserve irreplaceable biological specimens. You diverted critical power during an emergency situation, potentially endangering the entire station." The diversion was calculated and controlled. At no point did it threaten station integrity. The commander's expression didn't soften. "That will be for the review board to determine. For now, you're confined to quarters when not being debriefed." Lyra stepped forward, her presence immediately drawing all eyes. Many humans on the station had never seen a Florian up close. "Commander," she said, her melodic voice carrying a newfound strength. "Engineer Roan acted to preserve the last living specimens of multiple extinct species. His actions were not merely justified, they were necessary." The commander regarded her with barely concealed impatience. "Station protocol is clear. Resident Lyra, non-essential sections are deprioritized during emergencies." "And who decides what is essential?" Lyra challenged, her fronds fully extended in what Rowan now recognized as a posture of determination. "To my people, these living connections to our destroyed world are more essential than any machine or structure. Your cultural values, while respected, do not override station safety protocols," the commander replied. Dr. Morgan, who had entered behind the security team, now stepped forward. "Commander, if I may, the xenobotanical specimens in this garden have significant research value. Several of my team's current projects rely on compounds derived from these plants." The commander turned his attention to the chief science officer. "This is the first I'm hearing of this research. Doctor." "The studies are in early phases," she replied smoothly, "but promising enough that I authorized Engineer Roan's emergency measures." She glanced at Rowan with the barest hint of a smile. "Perhaps not through the proper channels, which I take full responsibility for, but with the best interests of the station's scientific mission in mind." Rowan kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he was stunned by Dr. Morgan's intervention. She was risking her own standing to support his actions. The commander looked between them, clearly suspicious, but unwilling to directly challenge the station's most senior scientific authority. "A full investigation will still be conducted," he said finally. "Until then, Engineer Roan, you're reassigned to Dr. Morgan's team for this research project." With that, he turned and left, the security team following in his wake. When they were gone, Roan turned to Dr. Morgan. "Thank you," he said simply. She shrugged. "The commander will cool down eventually. Besides, I wasn't entirely lying. These plants do have research potential." Her gaze moved to Lyra, then back to Roan. "And it's about time you found something to care about beyond your duty roster." After she too had departed, Roan and Lyra were left alone in the garden, now bathed in the ethereal light of the transformed memory crystal. "Your people take great risks for what they value," Lyra observed, moving closer to him. "Some of us," Roan corrected. "Not all." "You," she said, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "You took a risk for something that was important to me, not to you." Roan looked around at the garden they had saved together. "I think it became important to me, too," he admitted. In the days that followed, Roan worked alongside Lyra to document the unexpected changes in the garden following the black hole's passage. The memory crystal continued to grow, though more slowly now, and many of the plants showed accelerated development and new characteristics. Dr. Morgan's research project quickly became genuine as the scientific potential of the altered flora became apparent. The garden, once designated as a non-essential cultural accommodation, was reclassified as a primary research facility. For Roan, however, the most significant development wasn't in the plants, but in himself. The walls he had built around his heart since the loss of Earth, since the death of his mother and the scattering of everything he had known, were slowly crumbling. He found himself sharing meals with Lyra, telling her stories of his childhood on Earth, of the small window garden his mother had maintained, even as the world outside deteriorated. He spoke of things he had told no one on the station, of his fears, his regrets, his abandonment of hope. In turn, Lyra shared the history of Flore, of her people's deep connection to their botanical ecology, of the devastation they had felt when their son began to die. She taught him the meanings behind the movements of her fronds, the significance of the colors that rippled through them with her emotions. One evening, as they sat beneath the canopy of the memory crystal, Lyra asked, "Do you still believe what they say about humans? That you are too cold for love?" Roan considered the question carefully. "Humans can love deeply," he finally said. "But we can also shut ourselves off from love when it hurts too much. I did that for a long time. And now?" Lyra's fronds glowed with a gentle pink hue he had never seen before. "Now I'm not so sure that was the right choice." Lyra moved closer, her shoulder touching his. "On Flore, we believed that to live was to connect, to each other, to our world, to the universe. Isolation was seen as a kind of death. On Earth, many believed something similar," Roan said. "But when everything you connect to is taken away, you find new connections," Lyra finished for him. "You build new gardens in the void." The phrase struck Roan with unexpected force. Wasn't that what he had been helping Lyra do? Build a garden in the emptiness left by loss? And in doing so, hadn't he begun to plant seeds in his own barren heart? Their moment of connection was interrupted by a station-wide alert, not an emergency this time, but an announcement. "Attention all personnel. Stellaris 7 has been detected entering the sector. Arrival expected within 48 hours. All departments prepare for diplomatic protocols." Lyra's fronds rippled with excitement. "Stellaris 7. That's the Florean generational ship, my people." Roan felt a complex mixture of emotions. Joy for Lyra, certainly, but also a sudden, unexpected pang of loss. "They're coming here? To Nexus Station?" "Yes, for trade negotiations, and to collect any Floreans who wish to rejoin the main population." Her iridescent eyes searched his face. "This is wonderful news. I can show them the garden, how it survived and evolved." Roan forced a smile. "That's great news," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. The entire station prepared for the arrival of the Florean ship, the first official diplomatic contact between Floreans and the Interstellar Alliance in over a decade. Botanical Sector 12 became a flurry of activity as Lyra prepared the garden for inspection by her people's elders. Roan helped where he could, but found himself increasingly withdrawn. The prospect of Lyra leaving with her people, for surely she would want to rejoin them, created a hollow feeling in his chest that he hadn't experienced since the loss of Earth. When Stellaris 7 finally arrived, it was a sight to behold. A massive, organically shaped vessel that seemed to be part machine, part living entity. It docked with Nexus Station amid much ceremony, and a delegation of Florean dignitaries came aboard. Roan watched from a distance as Lyra greeted her people in the main docking bay, her fronds vibrating with joy as she conversed in their native language. She looked so natural among them, so much a part of them, that Roan felt his fragile hopes crumbling. He returned to his quarters and requested a duty shift that would keep him away from the diplomatic proceedings. Dr. Morgan denied the request with a terse message. "Face this, Roan." The next morning, he received a summons to Botanical Sector 12. When he arrived, he found not only Lyra, but also 3 elder Floreans, their fronds more elaborate and their skin deeper in color than hers. "Engineer Roan," Lyra said formally, though her fronds rippled with that now familiar pink hue. "May I present the elders of Stellaris 7. Roan bowed slightly, following the protocol he had hastily reviewed. "I am honored to meet you." The tallest of the elders stepped forward. "We have heard much about you, engineer, about your role in preserving this garden during the gravitational anomaly." "I only did what was necessary," Roan replied, uncomfortable with the attention. "Necessity is subjective," another elder said, her voice melodic but penetrating. "You chose to value what was necessary to Lyra above what your own people deemed necessary." Roan didn't know how to respond to that. The third elder moved closer to the memory crystal, which now dominated the center of the garden. "This transformation is remarkable. Our scientists would be eager to study it." "Yes," the first elder agreed. "We would like to propose that this entire garden be transferred to Stellaris 7, where it can be properly studied and preserved among our people." Roan felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. Not just Lyra leaving, but the entire garden, the space that had somehow become more home to him than his sterile quarters. That would be a significant undertaking, he managed to say, his engineer's mind automatically considering the logistics, even as his heart rebelled. "But worthwhile," the second elder said. "Lyra has explained its importance, both culturally and now scientifically." All eyes turned to Lyra, who had been uncharacteristically quiet. Her fronds were moving in complex patterns Roan couldn't interpret. "Elders," she finally said, "I am honored by your interest in the garden, but I must respectfully decline the proposal to transfer it to Stellaris 7. The elders' fronds rustled in what Roan assumed was surprise. "This garden has taken root here," Lyra continued. "It has adapted to this environment, formed connections with this place. To move it now would risk everything we have built. We have the technology to recreate the environment precisely," the first elder argued. Lyra shook her head. "It's more than the physical environment. It's the energy here, the connections formed." Her gaze flickered briefly to Roan. "Some roots go deeper than soil." The elders conferred among themselves in their native language, their fronds moving in intricate patterns. Finally, the tallest turned back to Lyra. "Your attachment to this place is unexpected," he said, "but perhaps understandable, given your isolation from our kind for so long. Will you at least return to Stellaris 7 for a time, to reconnect with your people?" Roan felt his heart sink further. Even if the garden remained, Lyra would surely go. To his surprise, she again shook her head. "My place is here now. Elders, with the garden, and with those who have helped it thrive." The meaning behind her words was clear, at least to Roan. She was choosing to stay, for the garden, yes, but also for him. The elders seemed to understand as well. The female elder's fronds rippled in what might have been amusement. Interspecies connections are not unprecedented, though rare. "We will respect your decision," the first elder said to Lyra, "but we would still like our scientists to study the memory crystal's transformation. Perhaps an exchange program can be arranged." The negotiations continued, but Roan barely heard them. His attention was fixed on Lyra, who had moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his in a gesture that transcended their different biologies. Later, after the elders had departed to continue their diplomatic mission, Roan and Lyra stood alone in the garden, beneath the glowing canopy of the memory crystal. "You're staying," Roan said, still not quite believing it. Lyra's fronds glowed with that now familiar pink hue. "Yes, but your people are important to me," she acknowledged, "and I will maintain connections with them. But this," she gestured around at the garden, then placed her hand over his heart. "This is where I've put down roots now." Roan covered her hand with his own. "I never thought I'd find a home again. After Earth." "Perhaps home isn't a place," Lyra suggested, Perhaps it's wherever we nurture connections that matter to us. A garden in the void, Rowan said softly, remembering her words from before. Yes. Her fronds brushed against his cheek in a gesture of deep affection. Our garden. In the months that followed, Botanical Sector 12 flourished beyond anything they could have imagined. The memory crystal continued to grow and evolve, developing properties that fascinated both Florian and human scientists. The garden became a hub of interspecies cooperation and research, with visitors from Stellaris 7 and other worlds coming to study its unique ecosystem. Rowan remained its chief engineer, developing new systems to support its expansion. With Dr. Morgan's backing, he designed an entire new sector of Nexus Station dedicated to xenobotanical research and cultivation. But more importantly, he and Lyra continued to grow together. Their connection deepened into something neither human language nor Florian concepts could fully capture, a love that transcended their different biologies and histories. Together, they had built something that defied the cold emptiness of space, something that grew and changed and adapted, something alive. They had built a garden in the void, and in doing so, they had proven that even in the most unlikely places, love could take root and flourish. On the 1-year anniversary of the black hole's passage, as they stood together beneath the now massive canopy of the memory crystal, surrounded by the thriving garden they had saved and nurtured together. Rowan finally found words for what he had learned. They said humans were too cold for love, he told Lyra, taking her hands in his. But they were wrong. We just need someone to show us how to grow again. Lyra's fronds glowed with that beautiful pink hue as she leaned forward to touch her forehead to his, the Florian gesture of deepest connection. And sometimes, she replied, all it takes is finding the right place to plant your heart. Above them, the memory crystal pulsed with light that seemed to reach out into the void beyond the station, a beacon of life and connection in the vast darkness of space. Proof that even in the most inhospitable environments, with care and courage, love could bloom eternal.